Well, hi, Rita.
Hi, Susan.
Wow, we're finally doing our podcast.
We are.
So, for those of you listening, Dr. Rita Eichenstein is my guest today and is a very good friend. And the conversation you're going to hear is really an extension of a conversation we had a few weeks ago, sitting around a pool, talking about the brain and parenting and all the cool things that she knows so much about. So, Rita, just let's get into it in a minute. I'm going to share your bio. And then people have some idea of your background, and then we'll start talking. Dr. Rita Eichenstein is a licensed psychologist with postdoctoral training in pediatric neuropsychology and special education. She maintains a private practice at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and areas of expertise include learning disabilities, attention deficit disorders, autism spectrum, gifted populations, and Rita is also the author of the award-winning book, Not What I Expected: Help and Hope for Parents of Atypical Children. Dr. Eichenstein incorporates a blend of conventional and alternative approaches, drawing upon the latest discoveries in neuroscience, psychological theories, and educational research in order to incorporate what will be most helpful for each client. So, I sometimes forget how deep you go in really understanding not only the child that you're testing, but the implications of those tests on the child and the child's family. You have a beautiful way of really articulating and languaging what you discover when you're working with a child that takes away the sort of negative bias and really helps this family and this child embrace who they are. Let's just start with that and what's going on in particular in the parental brain through this whole process.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for that introduction. Yeah, it is pretty fascinating when you think about what goes into testing and how to make that information useful. It's really interesting. We're trained with all these tests and learn statistics and test construction, all this boring stuff. And then you see this perfectly magical child come into your office, and it's like, what does all those charts and graphs have to do with this perfectly magical human being, And I truly believe that human diversity is part of what makes us human beings. We're all diverse. That's the beauty of the human species. We're not cookie cutters. You go into the pet store, you buy a hamster, and they all sort of look alike. Gotta tell you, I love hamsters, but they all sort of look alike, right? Humans are not like that. We are all different. There's dog species, and sometimes the dogs sort of all look alike in their species. But no, we are humans and we are diverse. And each person is on this planet to bring their gifts alive and to contribute something. And when I see these magical little kids who have fallen into a pothole show up, because that's really what it is, it's a pothole. How do I help them and their parents recognize this kid for who they are and help them out of the pothole? And the ultimate goal is to raise a happy, functional 25-year-old, not a fully functional 9-year-old, because if we can think back to when we were 9, no one expected us to win a Nobel Prize. But the stakes are so high now. Seriously, the stakes are so high. I just had a parent say to me, my 5-year-old refuses to join any extracurricular activities. And I said, well, I don't know about you, but when I was 5, I was sucking my thumb and taking naps after kindergarten every day.
And kindergarten meant you were going there and playing with blocks and dress up and coloring. You weren't learning how to read. Yeah.
No, not at all. So the human brain is going to evolve the way it evolves. And it's our societal expectations that have built so much pressure on us that at this point in 2022, it's almost unbearable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So understanding how the child's brain works was my original focus of inquiry. And I did that for a long time. And I still do that in my private practice. But after a while, I started to wonder about the parents. What happens after they leave my office? What happens to them? How do they? I tried to follow up, but I noticed that parents didn't have the language to talk about what was happening or what they were feeling. They didn't have a voice in the matter. So I started to investigate, is there a book written about it? Is there any research? And of course, if you start researching parents, you're going to find tons of information about parenting. We know about parenting, and you have you do your parenting very, very well. You educate the public very, very well. And there's so many books on parenting, but there's nothing that focuses on the parent, what's inside of the parent brain. Now, why is that important? Because it's a mistake when all of our theories put the focus on the child's developing brain, as if it's a unilateral structure. And even attachment theory, which was first originated by Bowlby and expanded by Mary Main, et cetera, they focused on the I-thou relationship, the mother-child relationship, as being critical for the child's development. But what they didn't focus on, and pardon me to all the attachment people out there, I love you, I appreciate you, but the truth about attachment is that it's bi-directional. And by that I mean, if you have a child that's very responsive to you as a parent and is doing everything they're supposed to do, your response to that child becomes much more enthusiastic. If you have a child who's atypical, who is perhaps non-responsive, who isn't making eye contact, who is slow to develop into themselves, or just different or exceptionally fussy, you are going to have a different response to them. So it's bi-directional. And the failure to consider the parent as a human being with emotions and responses that are unique is a real missing piece of the attachment theory. So they did research, and they found that mothers of autistic children have just as high a stress level as combat veterans.
Oh my God.
Yes. And so we're not kidding around. And of course, we're living in, dare I say, post-COVID age? No, we are living through COVID, where parents have been literally incarcerated with their children for extended periods of time without a break. Now, understanding the parent brain in that situation is critical to helping parents learn how to cope. It's not enough for us to give them coping tools like meditation or self-care, even though those are incredible, but you have to understand where a person's brain is at. Now, for professionals, even more, I feel the urgency of professionals to understand the parent brain, because when you think about it, and here's my big discovery, is that not only was there nothing written about parents of atypical kids, drum roll please, thank you, there was nothing written about parents as a distinct phase of development. So many of us had Psych 101, let's say in college, probably first year. It's the most popular major is psychology. So it stands to reason that a lot of people studied Psych 101, if not more. And what do you learn in Psych 101 typically? You learn about the stages of human development. Now, the most sophisticated one was Erik Erikson, who went through the stages, and he was the first pioneer to actually include adult stages.
Right.
But if I would show you the picture of the adult stages, there's something critically missing. And you can guess what it is, becoming a parent.
Yeah.
Now, over the time that I've done public speaking, I've spoken to the audience and I've said, think about, and the audience is typically parents or counselors who work with parents or professionals. And think about, anecdotally, your brain as a parent, and think about a peer friend that you have, or a sibling or someone in your family who is your age but does not have children. Is there any doubt in your mind that you think respond and feel completely different than that person? So why has this not been discovered and talked about. And I feel it was the big oops, the big mistake of the 20th century. And so I would like to, reframe that so we don't miss it for our 21st century evolving parents. Because what do we have now that we didn't have in the 20th century? We have the ability to do brain scanning and research on normal brains, and normal brains in different categories. So lo and behold, there are some pretty wonderful researchers out there, not myself, but the researchers, I'm just reporting, who are actually doing brain scans on parent brains. So I'd like to share a little bit with your audience about what happens to the parent brain. So, and why it's so critical, because they now believe that these structures stay permanent. So the architecture of the brain changes, and it's probably pretty permanent. In other words, once a mom, always a mom.
Even if you've got a 40-year-old or. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Let's hear it.
The same spikes are going to go up. Wow. Okay. So.
No, I want to geek out on this. I love talking about the brain.
Let's geek out. Okay. So let's say Susie goes to school with Gina, and you go to elementary school and you go to high school together and you go to college together, and you're building your professional brain. And your frontal lobe is developing just beautifully. You know how to study, you know how to get the grades, you start focusing on career. So far, Susie and Gina are in the same path. This is true for males as well, but we're just going to focus on this for now.
Okay.
Gina goes off and gets a high-tech CEO job and is doing very well. Susie, on the other hand, says, well, I want to work, but I also have this dream of having a baby. I've always wanted a baby. Well, let's say you get a partner. Okay. So the partners start to dream together. And by the way, baby fever is real, and it's real for both men and women. It is real for straight and gay adults. It is real for transsexual, transgender. It is real for anyone, any human being who starts to think they want a baby. So This is regardless of who you are. The minute you start getting baby fever, things start to change. First of all, your hormonal levels start to change. You start getting a bigger flow of oxygen. In the preconception period, your estrogen will start flowing stronger.
This is for a woman.
This is for a woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a man, his oxytocin will also increase, and they start colliding into a shared illusion of optimism. And the shared illusion of optimism in males, their testosterone, well, once the conception begins and we are expecting a baby, we can anticipate significant brain and hormonal changes in both men and women. Women we might be more familiar with. So oxytocin, the love chemical, increases for both parents. The male testosterone level drops, they become less aggressive, and their vasopressin increases. And vasopressin is the hormone and the neurotransmitter that creates the papa bear, the guarding, the protective. He start becoming very protective of his clan. In mom, we've got the oxytocin and the prolactin. So nature conspires with the adults to create a perfect harmony of expecting that baby bird to land in the nest. We are wired this way. And intellectually and cognitively, our frontal lobe starts to soften, and all that problem solving, deep scheduling, priorities start to shift. So different brain centers start to take over. So for example, the insula, which is the source of empathy, starts to become much more receptive. And your deep executive function, the CEO of your brain that's conducting your orchestra, the tune becomes a little more, shall we say, lullaby-ish. And there's a shared fantasy. The shared fantasy is of a perfect child, even though intellectually you're going to say, just healthy, I'll take any child anyway. But what I want to stress is that there's nothing logical about parenting. So the logical parts of your brain, I don't want to say they stop functioning, but they become wrapped in gauze. Because the disruption to the high functioning executive person is going to be profound, that all of that is sort of wrapped in gauze.
And by the way, none of this is going on for Gina, who's still got her CEO at the tech company job, right? So this is
so
a whole different brain that Susie's growing in response to conception and expecting this child.
Absolutely. So it's very important for women to keep their friendships going for the most part. That's a whole other conversation. And so Susie and Gina will tend to keep meeting for not cocktails anymore, but they'll tend to keep meeting for perhaps coffee, or now Susie's drinking herbal tea. Gina's thinking, I'm losing a friend here. And Susie's thinking, no, please don't abandon me. I still want to be cool. I can still be cool even with my herbal tea. But the truth is, you are now on two very different tracks. Okay. So when the child is born, there's a lot of parents fantasize the idealized child, and they have hopes and expectations for them. And when they see their real child, sooner or later, that real child falls from grace. That's just wired into our anatomy. As the child becomes their authentic self, they become further and further away from what you expected. Hence my book, Not What I Expected. How to Love Your Real Child should have been the title. How to embrace and accept who your child is. But you got to go through your own brain. So what my goal is to give parents a voice in terms of understanding their brain, and what makes their brain different is they evolve into the parenthood stage. And make no mistake about it, the parenthood stage is completely different. So it's not just Susie and Gina take a pause and eventually they come back together. They are all, they're going to be technically brain different for a long time.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that Susie isn't going to go back to being a wonderful CEO. In fact, in my new research, you can actually be an even better CEO, because what happens to new parents is their priorities shift. And when your priorities shift, your neuronal structure shifts. So there's gray matter in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it expands significantly in volume as you're a parent.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. So there's gray matter responsible for bonding with your child. It expands significantly in volume, and it's considered to be a little on the permanent side. The amount of estrogen a pregnant woman has during just one pregnancy is actually more than a woman who is never pregnant will experience in an entire lifetime.
Oh my gosh.
Now, as for dads, the gray matter didn't change quite as much. That one seems to be specifically for the way the woman works, but there's enough changes in the dad's life as well.
Wait, Rita, but wasn't there a study that a gay parent man who is assuming a maternal caregiving role, can you speak to that?
Yes. So brain researcher Ruth Feldman, she's in Israel, she has studied gay parents and the maternal oxytocin level and brain changes. And this is true for gay parents as well. and she's done a lot of studies on male gay parents. And so, and even adopted
Yeah.
babies, same thing. And she found that, and I'm quoting her, what scientists do know is that becoming a parent looks like, at least in the brain, a lot like falling in love. So the networks that become really sensitized are those that involve vigilance and social salience.
Which are probably great shifts to happen if you're going to go back to your job as a CEO or in the workforce.
Bingo. That's it. Exactly. So that falling in love shifts your priorities, vigilance and social salience. It's in the amygdala. There's also a lot of dopamine networks that are creating ping, ping dopamine rewards. So you're getting rewarded. You know, there's a high. There's a high to having babies and falling in love. And the same circuitry, which really cool little side fact. The same circuitry is what makes babies smell so good to their mothers.
Delicious.
So it's unbelievable. So yes, the man's parental brain has a lot of shifts also. So even though only the bio mom experienced pregnancy, birth, and lactation, so that sensitizes the amygdala, but evolution has created other pathways for adoptive parents and gay men to adapt to the parental role. And so when you adapt, your brain also adapts. So the fact of simply caring for a child forges new neural pathways. Undiscovered rooms in the parent brains that Gina doesn't have.
Oh my God.
Gina may have her champagne, but you'll get your champagne too.
Yeah.
Susan gets her champagne.
So let's, because we could just go for,
I know,
hours, but let's go into like, what is the takeaway? What is the value? How can parents begin to understand this and use it in their daily parenting lives? What have you seen to be the positive shift that comes about when parents start understanding such a primal thing you're describing?
Well, that's a good question. So first of all, parents have to stop being so hard on themselves. If I've learned anything about parents, is they're way too quick to beat themselves up. Yeah. Why do I have dementia? Why am I so foggy? I've lost my memory. I can't remember anything. I'm so scattered. So the truth is that you are not scattered. You have developed different pathways to perform very important functions. And the car keys, finding the car keys or buying the right dishwashing liquid isn't at the forefront of your priorities. Amazing. So your priority is your child. And you have to understand that while the brain is very multifaceted and you can certainly go to work and do a very good job at work, you will now actually be able to hyper-focus and get that job done once you've taken care of your child. So I want you to stop beating yourself up, understanding this tsunami effect of having a child and raising a child, and it is a tsunami, and how your brain is, and have some respect for how your brain is evolving. This is the brain that's going to take you through the rest of your life. Your heart has literally opened. Your compassion center is hopefully, or wider, unless we can talk about, so what happens when you have an atypical child. So we'll get there in 1 minute. Okay. But your heart center has opened. Your empathy wiring is much wider than it was. Your level of oxytocin, the love drug. Now with fathers, the vasopressin that Papa Bear care does recede in the back if they're not the primary caregiver. So in other words, for the first year, it's very powerful. And then after that, if they don't stay home and continue to care for the child, that recedes. Okay. And that probably could be true for moms who go back to work full time. Some of that love drug probably recedes, and that's a problem. That's a problem. You want to keep that, you need to keep the oxytocin strong. How do we keep oxytocin strong? Well, it's the touch effect. Hugging, caressing, a massage. I mean, of course, I like to build oxytocin by bonding with your child, by cuddling with your child, by hugging your child.
Yeah.
If that isn't doing it for you, you may need to take a time out and get some massage. The coolest fact, since I'm a dog person, is that hugging your dog or rubbing your dog also will give you some of that oxytocin.
Okay.
And side note, it also increases the oxytocin in the dog.
Aww.
So
Okay.
oxytocin is a generous and abundant hormone out there, and you can cultivate it.
Isn't that too what gets you, before we wrap up, let's talk about the atypical child, but with any child, isn't that true that the more flooded or saturated you are with the feel-good bonding neurotransmitter, the easier you get to kind of manage the bumps on the road of parenting? It's like having better shock absorbers if you're on a bumpy road. That if that I've had clients who seem to have really challenging children, some who really were suffering on a regular basis, understandably, because it can be very difficult, and others who just seem to fare better. Now, there could be a whole host of reasons that aren't obvious, well beyond are they bonded or not. But it certainly seems to me that if you're supplementing that need for oxytocin, it's going to make at least take the edge off at least some of the challenging moments. Would you agree?
Well, yes, partially. I don't want to put the whole brunt of why am I so stressed out is my lack of oxytocin. So there are many other ways, and I've always advised parents. In my book, I talk about the self-care menu.
Okay.
If you have 5 minutes, that's like the appetizer, what to do with your 5 minutes. If you have 15 minutes, here's your soup or salad.
Nice.
Appetizer. And then if you have time for a full course dinner, whatever.
Awesome. I love that.
Dessert chunks.
Okay.
So self-care is really important. Time away from your kid is really important, but that bonding is really important too. And I think in times of COVID, when you've been so incarcerated with your children, it's incredibly important to do the little self-care things.
Okay.
And so the parent brain can be incredibly flooded with cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
Yeah.
When things don't go right. Or imagine the stress of wondering if there's something wrong with your kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're flooded with cortisol. And when you go to seek out if something's wrong with your kid, it can be a really frightening experience.
Yeah.
So I designed in my book, based on the 5 stages of grief from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I mean, those 5 stages have been taken and applied to lots of circumstances, but I specifically tied it to why and how does that make sense within the brain's neuronal structure as we understand it.
Awesome.
And so the first phase is denial.
Yes.
And so, I mean, if you think about going into the doctor's office, there have been movies about this, how you hear or something dawns on you that you don't like, and all of a sudden you can't hear the voice anymore, and they dub in sound of loud heart pounding, and everything around you sort of blurs, and you're like that. Deer in headlights, we call that deer in headlights. That's part of the freeze response, and that's really normal. Because don't forget, falling in love, being bonded, loving this child is an experience that you've never experienced any intense love like this in your life. And it's very special. And then finding out that something is different about your child really shakes up the homeostasis of this path you're going on. So back to Susie versus Gina.
Rita, I'm going to pause because we really should be wrapping up right now.
Okay.
And I want to make sure that you cover those. So why don't you wrap? I'll pick it up and I'll edit that out.
Okay.
So pick up the next 4 stages if you want.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
So after denial, the next step, it's if someone steps on your toe in the supermarket and your first response is freeze. Did that really happen to me? That really hurts. Your next response, if you didn't have a nice, polite frontal lobe that supports your politeness, you would be angry. Hey, Buster, what did you just do? Luckily we have learned manners, but that's your tendency. So in parents, especially the dads with their vasopressin elevated and their testosterone returned to full strength, someone is going to get an angry response. Okay. Someone. Anger is a phase of learning and to adapt to that your child is different. And that's primarily, I call that the dad one. The moms can do it too. And I hate to gender stereotype, but if it's important for professionals to understand that you're not working with nasty people. You are working with parents who are going through the grieving process of readjusting their understanding of who their child is. After that comes bargaining and seeking. So the human seeking system, the CEO of your brain, turns back on and says, I've been to college, I can do this. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to research the right way to help my kid with ADHD or with a learning disorder or with speech delay. I'm going to research this. And, they go to Dr. Google, and seriously, Dr. Google does not replace the years and years of training that many of your professionals have, but I totally understand the instinct. And I name in my book a few people that have actually hired researchers, one with severe epilepsy and one with severe autism. And we know the movie Lorenzo's Oil. That have actually helped. The most majority of us, we're not trained in this area. So please don't turn your child into a lab rat in your, and I hate to say ego-driven, but like response to solve this yourself. Surrender a little bit. Let's see what happens. Now, the next stage is depression, and this is particularly really, really an important phase. Honor your depression.
Yeah.
When you're depressed, chances are you're also being oppressed. You're being oppressed by a kid that's different, by a kid whose demands are relentless, by an atypical demand on you as a parent that's just not normal. Honor your depression. And when you bear in mind that when you go to a psychiatrist or a therapist to seek help, there's nothing in the textbooks that talks about how to treat parents. So you have to inform them. And the only way, so I recommend go to a professional that has kids. They will get it. It's sort of something I'd like to change in the dialogue of training professionals, but they don't really understand. But honor your depression, kindness, take out the self-blame, okay? This again is normal. Having an atypical child is normal. Your responses are normal. And ultimately acceptance. Except we could talk about acceptance for a full hour. So acceptance, I will say, doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. It means that you're able to hold two feelings in your heart at once, the capacity for joy and the capacity for grieving or stress. It's possible for the heart to expand to hold two feelings simultaneously.
Wow. What a friggin' big whole download. That is powerful.
It's a lot.
I'm going to just say that again because somebody might be offended by friggin'. Wow. What a download. That is powerful.
It's a lot.
And it comes through that it, you've lived it, you've seen it. And thank you for kind of giving us a peek into not only the brain of a parent, but as we've spoken, just this process of coming to terms with the child you've been given and the humanity around the way you've spoken about it, instead of, oh, I know it's a blessing in disguise. And it may be, and it may also be just a really challenging transition to come to kind of line up with reality. And I love the compassion and the understanding that you've folded into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any particular one big thought you want to wrap up with? Anything you want to say to parents, all parents, not just parents of an atypical child, that kind of might be something they can think about this week?
Sure, I have a lot. Let me double down into quick takeaways. Number one, respect your brain. Your brain is the most highly evolved brain, the parent brain, in the entire human species is the parent brain. Give it some respect. Trust it. You've got built-in wisdom in your brain that nature and environment has conspired to give you. Start to listen to it, but you can only listen to it if you trust it.
Nice.
And that includes the depression and the bad feelings too. Trust everything
Beautiful.
and see how you could turn it into. And the last note is, if you're looking for a teacher, someone to really guide you, look at your child, talk to them, spend some time with them, get to know them. Chances are that together you can forge forward in some pretty exciting ways.
Mm, mm, mm. Oh my gosh, I just love this conversation so much. Thank you, Rita.
Me
Please
too.
tell people how they can find out more about you, your book, your work.
Okay, so my book, Not What I Expected, Help and Hope for Parents of Atypical Children. You can find that on Amazon. You can either Google Not What I Expected or Rita Eichenstein. My website is drritaeichenstein.com. And yeah, that's about it.
Let's spell Eichenstein, because it may not be spelled the way people are picturing it.
Oh, totally. So my website is drritaeichenstein.com.
Awesome.
Very
And
German.
you can get there probably by the book title, Not What I Expected, but
Right.
I want to make sure that, I know that you have wonderful resources. So thank you again. And
Thank you.
much to think about.
It was a pleasure.